What if I told you that one quiet decision made behind closed doors just shattered decades of American dominance? No missiles were fired, no declarations of war, no dramatic press conferences, just one word: no. Canada, America's closest ally, its most dependable partner, the country everyone assumed would never challenge Washington, just did the unthinkable. And here's what's terrifying for the United States. This wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. It was deliberate. And it changes everything. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, alliances, and who really controls North America. Let me set the scene. Washington extends its final offer to Canada. The assumption? Simple. Canada will comply. Canada always complies. After all, look at the facts. 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States. NORAD binds their military defense together. The longest undefended border in human history connects them. So what happened? Canada said no, not loudly, not aggressively. With surgical, calculated politeness, they rejected Washington's demands. And here's where it gets interesting. The markets barely moved. The press ran a few headlines. The world moved on. But beneath the surface, a geopolitical earthquake had just begun, because this wasn't about one deal. This was about something far more dangerous for American power. Let me explain. Here's what Washington got catastrophically wrong. For decades, American policymakers operated under one fundamental assumption: Canada needs us more than we need them. Sounds reasonable, right? The numbers support it. The history supports it. But here's the problem with assumptions. They blind you to change. While Washington was busy assuming loyalty, Canada was quietly doing something remarkable. They were diversifying. Trade deals with Europe, expanding, relationships with Asia, growing, climate leadership on the global stage. Canada stepped up while America stepped back. And suddenly, Canada realized something that terrified Washington. They had options. Think about that for a moment. The country that was supposed to be dependent wasn't dependent anymore. And when you have options, you have power. Now, I need you to understand something crucial. This rejection didn't happen overnight. It was years in the making. Inside Canadian institutions, from parliament to bureaucracies to think tanks, a quiet revolution was brewing. New questions emerged. Why should Canada always follow Washington's lead? Are American interests automatically Canadian interests? In a multipolar world, does blind loyalty even make sense? The answers that came back? Uncomfortable for Washington. Canadian political leaders, watching America retreat from multilateralism, watching trade wars ignite, watching climate agreements abandoned, started thinking differently. They started thinking independently. And here's the kicker. Public opinion shifted too. Nationalism rose. Pride in Canadian identity strengthened. The idea of being America's junior partner became politically toxic. So when Washington made its final offer, expecting compliance, the institutional machinery in Ottawa was already programmed for a different response. But wait, it gets even more interesting. Let me take you inside the corridors of American power. When news of Canada's rejection arrived, the reaction was confusion. Not anger, not yet, just genuine disbelief. How could this happen? Don't they understand who we are? What leverage do they have? And right there, in those questions, you can see the fatal flaw in Washington's thinking. American policymakers were operating with an outdated playbook. They saw the world through a 20th century lens. America leads, allies follow. Economic power equals compliance. But the 21st century doesn't work that way anymore. Power is no longer concentrated, it's distributed, and Canada, quiet, polite, often overlooked Canada, had figured this out before Washington did. The miscalculation wasn't just about one rejected offer. It was about an entire worldview that no longer matched reality. Now here's where things get really fascinating. The immediate aftermath? Quiet, almost anticlimactic. But beneath the surface, both capitals were recalibrating. In Ottawa, diplomatic channels reinforced Canada's position. The message was clear: we're not hostile, we're independent. Government officials framed the rejection as a victory for sovereignty. In Washington, emergency meetings convened at the State Department. National Security Council briefings intensified. One question dominated every discussion: will others follow Canada's example? And that question right there is what kept American policymakers up at night. Because if Canada could say no, who else might? Europe was watching. Asia-Pacific nations were taking notes. Emerging economies were reassessing their own relationships with Washington. Canada had done something unprecedented. They had shown the world that American dominance wasn't absolute. And once that perception cracks, it's almost impossible to repair. Let me be very clear about what was at stake here. This wasn't just about U.S.-Canada relations. This was about the entire architecture of American global power. Think about it. If Canada, the closest ally, the most integrated partner, the country literally connected to American defense infrastructure, could reject Washington's demands, then what message did that send to European allies frustrated with American trade policies? To Asian partners caught between Washington and Beijing? To Latin American nations seeking more autonomy? The answer, a very dangerous message for American interests. Suddenly, alliance no longer meant automatic compliance. Suddenly, negotiations meant actually negotiating. And for a superpower accustomed to dictating terms, this was a fundamental shift. Now let's talk money, because that's where power really lives. Canada's rejection created immediate ripples in the USMCA framework. Remember, this trade agreement was supposed to lock in American advantages for decades. But Canada's newfound assertiveness forced a reassessment. American trade negotiators suddenly had to ask uncomfortable questions. Were the terms actually fair? Could they afford to alienate their largest trading partner? What happens to supply chains if Canada looks elsewhere? Meanwhile, Canada had its own economic calculations. Yes, the U.S. remained crucial. No one was denying that. But the rejection became a bargaining chip, a demonstration that Canadian cooperation wasn't guaranteed, it was earned. And in future negotiations, Canada would demand more. Better environmental provisions, fairer energy export terms, greater regulatory independence. The dynamic had shifted permanently. Here's something most people overlook. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, has bound U.S. and Canadian military operations together since the Cold War. It's one of the closest defense partnerships on Earth. So what happens when political trust erodes? After Canada's rejection, military cooperation didn't collapse, but questions emerged. Canadian defense officials started asking important questions. Are our security interests aligned with Washington's? Should we be this dependent on American defense infrastructure? What does true defense sovereignty look like? These weren't treasonous questions. They were strategic ones, and they represented something Washington had never really faced before. An ally questioning the fundamental terms of the alliance itself. Let me zoom out for a moment. Because this story isn't really about Canada and America, it's about something much bigger. It's about how power works in the 21st century. Here's the old model. Superpowers dominate. Smaller nations comply. Economic dependency equals political loyalty. Here's the new reality. Power is distributed across multiple centers. Even small nations can leverage global connections. Sovereignty is no longer negotiable. It's demanded. Canada's rejection was a symbol of this transformation. It showed that the post-World War II order, where American leadership was unquestioned, has fundamentally changed. We're now living in a multipolar world, and in this world, even your closest allies have red lines. Cross them, you'll find out how quickly loyalty evaporates. So what happens now? Here's the reality both countries face. For the United States, the old playbook is obsolete. Dominance through economic pressure and military might, less effective than ever. Washington must learn to negotiate, truly negotiate with allies. Not dictate, not demand, negotiate. This means respecting partner sovereignty, offering genuinely mutual benefits, accepting that compliance cannot be assumed. It's a humbling shift, but it's necessary. For Canada, independence comes with responsibility. Rejecting Washington's offer was the easy part. Building genuine strategic autonomy, much harder. Canada must now strengthen domestic institutions, diversify international partnerships, develop independent policy frameworks. The rejection was a statement. Now comes the hard work of building the reality behind that statement. Here's what gives me cautious optimism. Despite everything I've described, the U.S.-Canada relationship isn't collapsing. It's evolving. The institutions that bind these two nations, trade agreements, defense partnerships, diplomatic channels, are showing remarkable adaptability. Washington isn't severing ties. Ottawa isn't becoming an adversary. Both sides are recalibrating. New negotiations will emerge. New frameworks will develop. A more balanced relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy, might actually strengthen the alliance in the long run. Because here's the truth about institutions. They survive not by resisting change, but by adapting to it. And right now, we're watching that adaptation in real time. So what does this all mean? Let me leave you with this. Canada's rejection of Washington's final offer was more than a diplomatic moment. It was a lesson about power. It's not permanent. It must be earned, maintained, and respected. A lesson about alliances. Even the closest partnerships have limits. Cross them at your peril. A lesson about sovereignty. In a multipolar world, every nation, no matter how small, has the right to assert its own interests. And perhaps most importantly, a lesson about assumptions. The moment you believe your dominance is guaranteed is the moment you've already lost it. The world is changing. The question isn't whether you adapt. The question is whether you adapt fast enough. Now, if you think this is the end of the story, you're wrong. What Canada just did, other nations are watching, learning, planning. The next rejection might come from Europe, from Asia, from allies Washington never expected to challenge. And when that happens, the ripples will become waves. Subscribe because we're going to track every single shift in this new world order. Hit that notification bell because the next domino is about to fall. And drop a comment below. Do you think Canada made the right call, or did they just make a powerful enemy? I'll see you in the next one.